But if you can't have a conversation, that's a pretty poor starting point.
I think it is, but it's a common position that we find ourselves in, I think, as an organisation and for our staff, and that's why we introduced the Support and Information Cafe on a Thursday, was for that very reason, to create an environment and to create a situation where people felt that they could even initially start to raise the sense of how difficult those discussions are to have. So often we find that people who come on a Thursday, their starting point will be that struggling with this difficult subject that feels so hard to broach in so many ways. So people often, the practical things are the things that they think about first, that sense of, you know, how are we going to manage our finances, what are we going to do around, you know, the mortgage or work or things like that. But what underpins that is more of that actual then in-your-face discussion about actually what does this mean for us or me as the individual or their partner or their family, their loved one. You know, where do we both sit in this really difficult discussion? And I think it's how we then facilitate that opportunity for people to be able to talk about that in a safe and supportive environment, because it is such a difficult question to ever comprehend. You know, none of us want to think about our mortality or the mortality of a loved one, but at some point we have to do it. And that's a given, but it's so very difficult, isn't it?
And it's harder where the couple, if you sat in a room and one wants to talk openly about death and dying and the other doesn't want to recognise the death and dying thing, that it must be really difficult to have a conversation with the two people at once, and that kind of drives you off in two different directions.
Yeah, and I suppose, you know, again, isn't it, it's how do we create opportunities for people to be able to do that at a time and place that's comfortable for them? So you can have that scenario where you sat down with a husband and wife or a couple or actually an adult and a child, and you're trying to have that discussion at that moment, and that actually is the wrong time for them. And it's how do we create those opportunities that then feel right time, right space, right place. And I suppose, I think for us as an organisation, that's also about how we support and facilitate our staff, and not just immediately our clinical staff, sometimes it's our broader staff generally, to feel that actually that's okay and that they can enable, if that person chooses that moment in time to talk about it, that actually they're okay with it and they don't shy away from it. And I think that's what the concept of Dying Matters really tries to promote, is how do we all take that moment to listen to somebody and to actually say, if that's their time when they actually want to talk about this, we have to enable that, we have to help that happen. And sometimes we can't orchestrate it in more sort of clinical settings, because that's not the moment. It could be that actually one of our nurses going out to support a family, for that family member, it's that moment, that time in the kitchen, making a cup of tea, when actually that's the moment they want to talk about what they're struggling with or what they're concerned about or what their thoughts, fears, expectations, questions are. And it's how do we facilitate that, isn't it?